It was just an ordinary day at the airport, or so it seemed. But when one airport staff member crossed the line, a simple interaction quickly turned into a nightmare for a young black girl. She had no idea what she was about to face when she showed up for her flight, but soon everything would change. Out of nowhere, she was dragged out of the terminal, humiliated in front of hundreds of strangers, all because of a misunderstanding, one that could have been easily avoided, but no one cared to listen to her side. The airport staff was adamant, even when she tried to explain herself. It felt like the world was against her, and she was left with nothing but confusion and hurt. But little did they know, this girl wasn't just any passenger. She had someone on her side who wasn't about to let this injustice slide. Her father, a man with authority and power, was about to step into the scene, and when he did, the staff quickly realized their massive mistake. What happened next shocked everyone. Stay tuned to see how this shocking confrontation unfolds and how the airport staff deeply regretted their actions when her father arrived. Would there be consequences, or would they try to cover it up? You won't believe the shocking twist coming up. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day at the airport. Travelers rushed through the terminal, announcements echoed overhead, and staff went about their usual routines. But then, something happened that no one saw coming. A young black girl, no older than 12, stood near the check-in counter, her eyes filled with confusion. She had her ticket in hand, her backpack slung over her shoulder, but for some reason, the airport staff wouldn't let her through. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Maybe there was an issue with her ticket, or some kind of misunderstanding. But as the minutes passed, it became clear. This wasn't just a mix-up. The staff spoke to her coldly, dismissing her questions, and before she knew it, they were escorting her out of the terminal. She was alone, scared, and humiliated. The looks from other passengers only made it worse. What the staff didn't know was that this girl wasn't just anybody, and they had no idea who they were about to cross. Because just when they thought they had the final say, her father arrived. And when he did, everything changed. The airport staff, so confident in their actions, suddenly found themselves in a situation they never expected, one they would soon regret deeply. The girl stood outside the terminal, gripping the straps of her backpack as she tried to understand what had just happened. She had followed all the rules, had her ticket, and had done nothing wrong. So why had they treated her like that? Passengers walked past, some casting sympathetic glances, others barely noticing, but no one stopped to help. Inside, the airport staff carried on as if nothing had happened. A few exchanged quiet words, one of them shaking their head like they had just handled an inconvenience. "We can't let just anyone wander in," one of them muttered. They thought the situation was over. They thought they had control. But then a man walked through the doors. He moved with quiet authority, his sharp eyes scanning the terminal. The moment he saw his daughter standing outside, his jaw tightened. He had been on his way to meet her for their long-awaited trip, only to receive a frantic call saying she had been thrown out of the airport. That was all he needed to hear. The staff barely noticed him at first, just another passenger, another face in the crowd. But that changed the second he approached the counter. His presence alone demanded attention. The same employees who had been so quick to dismiss his daughter now shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Meanwhile, the girl watched through the glass, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father like this before, not angry, but focused, determined. And as the staff scrambled to explain themselves, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not even close. The air inside the terminal felt heavier now. The airport staff, who had been so dismissive just moments ago, now fidgeted behind the counter, exchanging nervous glances. The man in front of them wasn't shouting, but there was something in his eyes that made them uneasy. He calmly placed his hands on the counter and asked the question they weren't prepared to answer. "Why was my daughter removed from the terminal?" The staff hesitated. One of them, a middle-aged employee with a stiff smile, cleared his throat. "Sir, there must have been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. avoiding eye contact. "We have security protocols." "And?" "Protocols," the father interrupted, his voice dangerously steady. She had a valid ticket. She was following the rules. But instead of helping her, you humiliated her and left her outside, alone. His tone never rose, but every word carried weight, pressing down on the staff like a force they couldn't escape. The manager had been watching from a distance, hoping the situation would settle itself. But now, seeing the tension growing, she stepped forward. "Sir, we assure you will look into this," she said with a forced politeness. "There's no need for—" "There's every need," the father cut in. He turned slightly, motioning toward the window where his daughter stood outside, watching. "She is just a child who did nothing wrong. But instead of treating her with basic respect, you threw her out like she didn't belong here." The crowd around them had begun to take notice. Passengers slowed their steps, some whispering, others pulling out their phones, sensing that something important was happening. The employees stiffened, realizing they weren't just dealing with one upset father, they had an audience now. One of the staff members, younger and visibly shaken, spoke up. "We thought she was alone," he admitted. "She didn't have a guardian with her, and we—" The father's eyes narrowed. "So instead of helping her, you decided to remove her." His voice was sharp now, the controlled edge slipping just enough to reveal his anger. "You didn't ask questions, you didn't check the facts, you just assumed." The silence that followed was deafening. The father looked at each of them, waiting, giving them a chance to explain themselves. But no one spoke, no one could. The weight of their mistake was settling in, thick and undeniable. And just when the tension couldn't rise any higher, a new voice broke through the air, one that sent a wave of panic through the staff. "Excuse me," said a firm voice from behind. A senior airport official had arrived, his sharp gaze taking in the scene. "What exactly is going on here?" The staff's faces paled. This was no longer just an argument. This was about to become something much bigger. The entire terminal seemed to pause as the senior airport official stepped forward, his sharp eyes sweeping over the tense scene. The staff shifted uncomfortably, their confidence fading as they realized this was no longer in their control. The father turned to face him, his expression unreadable, but his presence unwavering. "Sir," the official said, his tone firm but measured, "I understand there's a situation here. Would you care to explain?" The father didn't hesitate. He gestured toward his daughter, still standing outside with uncertainty in her eyes. "My daughter was kicked out of this airport despite having a valid ticket. She was treated unfairly, humiliated, and left alone because your staff assumed she didn't belong here." His voice was clear, unwavering. "Now I want to know why." The official's gaze flicked toward the staff, waiting for an explanation. The employees, who had been so sure of their actions earlier, now fumbled for words. The middle-aged employee, who had spoken first, took a deep breath. "There was a misunderstanding," he mumbled. We thought she was unaccompanied." The father's jaw tightened, and instead of helping her, you threw her out. Before anyone could respond, a voice from the crowd spoke up. A woman, a fellow passenger who had been watching everything unfold, stepped forward. "I saw it happen," she said, her voice strong. She wasn't causing trouble. She wasn't lost. She was standing right there with her ticket, but they treated her like she was a problem. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. More passengers nodded in agreement, and a few held up their phones, recording everything. The staff's faces turned pale. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was evidence. The official straightened, his expression darkening as he turned back to his employees. "Is this true?" he demanded. No one spoke. The guilt hung in the air like a storm cloud about to break. Then, just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse for the airport staff, the father pulled out his phone and made a single call. His voice was calm but decisive. "I need you here now." A few of the employees exchanged nervous glances. Who had he just called? The senior official, still trying to control the situation, took a step closer. "Sir, I assure you we will investigate this matter." "You won't have to," the father interrupted. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and met the official's gaze. "Because the people coming will handle it for you." The tension in the air became unbearable. The staff's expressions shifted from nervous to outright panic as the realization hit. Whatever was about to happen next was beyond their control. And as the minutes ticked by, every second felt heavier than the last. The tension in the terminal was thick, every second stretching into what felt like an eternity. The airport staff stood frozen, their earlier confidence completely gone. The father remained steady, his eyes locked on the official waiting. Then, the doors to the terminal swung open. A group of individuals in crisp suits walked in, their presence commanding immediate attention. The energy in the room shifted. The father turned slightly, nodding as they approached. The senior official stiffened when he recognized them. These weren't just any visitors. They were high-ranking executives from the airline and airport authority. People who had the power to change everything in an instant. One of them, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, stepped forward. "We received the call," he said, his gaze sweeping over the scene. His eyes landed on the girl still outside the terminal, looking hesitant and unsure. His expression darkened. "Is this her?" The father nodded. "My daughter," he said simply. The official turned to the staff, his voice sharp. "I want to hear exactly what happened." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, stumbling over their words, the employees tried to explain, blaming protocol, misunderstanding, anything to justify what they had done. But it was clear none of their excuses could undo what had already been set in motion. The silver-haired man listened, then turned to the father. "This is unacceptable," he said, "and it will be dealt with immediately." His voice carried a finality that made the staff members flinch. The father exhaled, his grit on his anger loosening just slightly. "I want an apology," he said. "Not just to me, but to my daughter. She deserves that much." The senior official turned to the staff. "Now," he ordered. Reluctantly, the employees stepped forward. The middle-aged one, the first to speak earlier, cleared his throat. His face was pale. "We're deeply sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should have handled this differently." The girl, who had finally stepped back inside, stood beside her father. She looked up at them, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack. "You made me feel like I didn't belong," she said softly. Her words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything else spoken that day. The silence that followed was deafening. Just when it seemed the situation had reached its conclusion, the silver-haired executive turned to the father. "Would you like to press formal action?" he asked. "This behavior goes against everything we stand for." The father studied the staff members, watching their uneasy expressions. He could see the regret in their eyes now, but it had come too late. He turned to his daughter. "What do you think?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I just want to go," she said. "I just want to be with you." The father nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." But as he turned to leave with his daughter, the senior official spoke again. "Before you go," he said, "I think you should know something." The father stopped. The official took a breath. "The reason those men arrived so quickly," he hesitated. "Your last name. We ran it through the system. Your—" But the father simply raised a hand, cutting him off. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said. "It matters what happened here today." With that, he placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and walked away, leaving the stunned staff behind, along with the knowledge that they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers.